For me, I think a voice and a song in particular carries with it a human experience at its simplest and often its rawest. Music has always been a vehicle for the spirit of people, the spirit of the times and the stories of people. And where we believe those stories, that's empathy in action. And that's where action can begin.
And I could cry.
Hi, I'm Hozier, and this is Cry Power, my podcast about people who are using what's available to them to change the world. Presented with our friends at Global Citizen, on each episode I'll be sitting down with people who are putting themselves out there to support a cause that's dear to them. I'll be talking to people whose work is making a real difference, musicians, artists, or just some of my heroes. So here we are in the music room of the home of the next guest. I suppose one of the most important musicians, artists of our time, certainly in Ireland's history.
Big in China as well, I just want to say. Wish that was true. Go on. Thank you, you're being too kind.
A hero of mine, a hero of so many, not only musically, culturally, with regards ethos and how we utilize that, how we engage with that. But the intro could go on for ages and ages, but it's an absolute honor and an absolute pleasure to be joined by yourself, Bono. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me.
But no, thank you for visiting with me in our house, in our home. Grown up in Dublin. I've lived all over the world, but this is where my family is, and this is where you are, and this is where our songs come from. There's some, source. It's around here.
Yeah. First time I met you, it was just before the Carnegie Hall show for Red and One. So I was waiting in a car outside. This was on the Songs of Innocence and Experience tour, I believe, in the Three Arena in Dublin. So I was waiting in a car, and I think Edge came out first, and you just came off the stage, straight off the stage from about, whatever, it was 15, 17,000 people or so. The car door opened, and you hopped in directly from stage, having walked straight off stage, completely unflappable, into the back lot, into the car. Took a moment, and then was like, okay, so we're doing Carnegie Hall next week. What's the story? Are you bringing your band or what? And it was just like this.
Well, I sometimes I can make sense off stage. No, when I come off a stage, but I have to tell you, that's a roll of a dice. You just were on. It was a good night. Yeah, you could have gotten it. You could have been in the car and had a babbling frog try to talk you into Carnegie Hall. I'm glad I made a bit of sense. No. That event was great.
That was great.
The first time I came across your work was just hearing Taking the Church on the radio, and I just wanted to know, who is this? I felt nauseous. I felt excited. I felt all the feelings I feel when I hear a truly, truly great song that I didn't write. And I was like, I went, fuck, dear me, it was like a pullover situation. I've had a few of them in my life, but not many. I was like, and I can't be operating heavy machinery at this moment. And then I found out it was this Irish geezer. Then I found it was this Irish geezer who lived 2 miles up the road. And then I just, I get out of the car and I lay in the middle of the road and hoped somebody would kill me.
Stop. Oh my God. There's no
And then you arrived, picked me up, put me in the car and said, are you okay there? We're going to get along just fine, dude.
The first time I met you was in the discussions of that event for Red and One, I believe the anniversary event that was taking place. There was presentations about the projections of the future for AIDS in Africa, and the progress that had been made and the progress that was looking likely in the next 25, 50 years. Staggering, absolutely staggering. And it was, I was kind of grounded in a way. Everything in that event was quite surreal to me. There was Bill Clinton was bopping around, first time meeting Miley Cyrus, and like a lot of Bill Gates, I believe. Fantastic, very, very amazing people. The whole thing was quite surreal for a moment. But some of those some of those things just brought me to earth in a very, very interesting way. It was just realizing just how achievable the seemingly unachievable was, you know.
A communal effort.
Communal effort, yeah.
Yeah, across disciplines, commerce, government. I thank you for turning up at those events. It's really hard. I don't know why I have any friends left, because now, especially when I see my famous friends, they just duck in case I'm going to ask them to do something. No, right. And you always sort of turn up, and you're angered by injustice, and you wade through these. These can be smarmy affairs, they can be schmaltzy affairs, but at Red we try to distill things, and there was things we wanted to communicate that night. And you know, there are other fights you could pick, but it just seemed to me that just these two pills that we were fighting for the right for people to access just symbolized inequality, and they physicalized it. You didn't get the pills, you die. You do get the pills, you live. And where you live should not decide whether you live. That's the basic premise of Red. And can we meet people where they are as consumers and piggyback their spending habits in order to afford people a dignified way of dealing with their disease?
First of all, there's not many people in the world who would be as busy as yourself, and so it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be sitting down with you, and thank you for allowing us to sit down and have a little chat. You know,
I feel exactly the same. Yes, I do, and I'm curious as to what questions you've got in your little book there.
It's really just there's very few people again I could talk to on the planet who have used music as a vehicle in the way that you have used music. Have used the opportunities that has given you to, I suppose, achieve goals which are in some ways very, very hard to quantify or to make sense of in just what can be achieved with regards the betterment of, let's say, one individual's life, or, you know, which again is a very
an equally important thing.
Very, very, yeah, and a very difficult thing to describe. But we're talking about millions of lives. So
yeah, I mean, look, the making sense, I think, is the phrase you just used. Trying to make sense of the nonsense of being famous. And why is it nonsense? Because it is great to get you a seat in a restaurant and not thrown out of pubs after hours. But what's nonsense about it is that what fame does is it upends the real order of things. In the real view in the world, you know, in God's view of the world, in the view of social justice, a mother or a fireman or, you know, a school teacher, they're incredible people who are not given really the kind of recognition that people who can remember their lines, actors, singers, musicians, people who do what we do anyway. You know, we do what we love. Mm-hmm. It's a strange thing to have us so regarded, and I think we need to know the nonsense of that. So celebrity is nonsense, but it's currency.
Yeah. And
I suppose I and you two wanted to spend our currency well. Mm-hmm. And we had to make sense of it. And we had a kind of prayer, if you like, as a band, which was to be useful. Mm-hmm. Simple prayer. We should have it at our family as well. I really, but it's a great, even if you don't believe in prayer, I think just it's a good thing to utter, isn't it? Can we be useful? Can this conversation be useful?
Yeah.
Can this podcast be useful? Can the people who listen to it become even more useful than they are? Mm-hmm. And we even more useful than we are. That'd be a nice goal for this podcast.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
A podcast about goals.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And it is, I suppose, increasingly a difficult question for a lot of people. We live very noisy lives and very, very cluttered lives, and very, increasingly so, that looking for purpose, that looking for usefulness in a world of crazy surplus as well too. And
material surplus, but a lot of spiritual vacuums.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And particularly in the church. Funnily enough.
Yeah.
We live at a time when a lot of people's spiritual lives is the music they're listening to. You know, your album, your recent album, the one before that. These sustain me. They sustain others in our, whatever that need is. And the thing that separates us, hopefully, as a species, is that spiritual ache, that thing that turns into empathy if you're making music, or if you're writing a play or a screenplay. You know, you're trying to understand. Empathy is about understanding another person's person. Mm-hmm. And so I think artists are generally a bit porous to other people's experience. So that's probably where the protest song begins, is you feel so shit about somebody else's circumstance and you just do not like feeling shit, and you don't have any other, utensils other than your guitar or a piano or your pen. You don't have any other weapon than your voice to fight against whatever it was. You know, I grew up in Cedarwood Road, and in the box room in Cedarwood Road, we had a lodger under the bed, John Winston Lennon. And so, you know, I'm 12 and I'm looking out the window of Cedarwood Road, and there's somebody whispering in my ear, and it's John Lennon. And what's he whispering? Well, I if I had to break it down, it would be something along the lines of, I can't do a Liverpool accent, but the world is more malleable than you think.
Yeah.
The world will take, if you kick it or caress it, you don't have to accept it being the way it is. That's what I picked up from John Lennon.
Right.
And later, Bob Dylan, and then he turned me on to Woody Guthrie, and I went, oh my God, this guitar kills fascists. Yeah. And I'm thinking in my teenage years, whoa, what does that mean?
Yeah.
This land is your land, this land is my land. I'm going, oh, this music can be stirring stuff for change.
Yeah, totally. The Cry Power podcast will explore the UN's 17 global goals, a series of objectives that aims to end extreme poverty, reduce inequality, and tackle climate change by 2030. To take action on any of these issues we talk about on the show, go to globalcitizen.org/crypower and get involved. Punk was a huge part of your early years and early sound as well too, and was coming into punk music. Obviously, there's so much kind of
rage.
There's so much rage. I wanted to ask you about that as well too, because I have heard that is something that you've said before is something that's always lived with you as well too. There always been a rage. Rage can be very, very directive and very instructive, and it can be an energy used. Often found in punk music. Was it always early that you saw music as a vehicle for, let's say, even it could be as simple as telling the truth or offering, reflecting upon the things that we have to be angry about, or the things that we can hope for?
It was quite early. We were 17 when we went to see the Clash in Trinity College, and the troubles up north were brewing. I mean, not just brewing; they were boiling over. I remember feeling violence in the air, but this is art. These people were making art. And yet it felt that threatening. And I went, ooh, something here I need to investigate. What are the ideas at the heart of this? And what did Joe Strummer mean when he was going, white riot? I want to riot, white riot, a riot on my own. I know he's not a white racist. I know he's not a white supremacist. So, to discover through artists their worldview, later, for instance, with Joe Strummer and the Clash, at the Sandinista album, I didn't know what the Sandinistas were, but I was the kind of curious person. I actually ended up in Central America.
Right.
I ended up in Nicaragua,
right,
talking with Ernesto Cardenal, if I can remember his name right. He was a minister, foreign minister, I think. And he's talking to me about Irish rebel poetry. And I'm saying, That's a load of bollocks. I'm saying I don't like people romanticizing bloodshed. And he said, well, you know, here's why we revolted. There were 17 families running Nicaragua at the time. And I'm still on it. I just want to understand how the world works. And, you know, the revolution in Nicaragua brought a lot of education, brought a lot of positives, and then some terrible negatives. And then I was like, wow, I need to understand politics more. And then you realize that sometimes change comes about really incrementally, in a very boring way, and that it's not about revolution. Sometimes it is, and it's not about these incendiary characters. Actually, it's about social movements. It's about people changing. The Nicaraguan people, the majority of them wanted to take charge of their destiny, and so they should be able to. And democracy is an amazing thing, and we live at a time when democracy is probably under the biggest threat. It's been under since I was born. Western democracy.
Yeah. With the Sandinistas, did it give you an insight into how much of the world, what was going on in all of its richness and all of its troubles? And was that something that influenced your outlook?
I was reading about liberation theology. It's a strange thing, you know, because I'm a person with this deep faith in God and deep suspicion of religion, and it's a sort of curious.
It's a good
place to be. Yeah. That's where I am, and where our family is, and I read about these people, these poor farmers in El Salvador and Central America, who were interpreting the scriptures to their own needs. There's 2,007 verses of scripture that pertain to poverty in the Holy Scriptures. Yet Jesus only speaks of judgment once, and it's how we treat the poor. Yeah. Not interested in your sexuality, not interested in all the obvious things that the church seems to be obsessed with. So I was like, wow, these are very interesting people. I went, you'd have loved it. It's like they'd have murals at their church meetings of the children of Israel fleeing Egypt, except Egypt would be America, and the Pharaoh was Ronald Reagan. Right. And they're running across, the sea is dividing, and all these Spanish farmers are running away from it. Yeah. Now, I later could see I could, as well as the romance, I could see the frailty of that vision. And but I witnessed stuff in Central America that was really disgusting and awful, and the bullying of people by America, by people I would later work with. And I came home, I spoke to the band about it. We were recording the Joshua Tree, and I described this firebombing of a hillside outside of Salvador in the countryside there to Edge, and asked him, could he do a Jimi Hendrix on it and try to use his guitar to paint a picture. Yeah. Big task.
Big ask.
He went at it, and it's strange. It's a bass line. It's the strangest bass line ever. It might be in about 10 keys at the same time. It can roll along for 7 minutes, and you don't seem to get bored, or maybe that's just us. But you can. The song has this power live, and Edge just uses it as a sort of jumping off point for his storytelling. I've got the verbal and the words and the lyrics. He's telling the story a different way, but the rage is in his guitar actually, and I suppose around about that time, it dawned on me, and it's dawned on me a few times, that yes, I'm moved by compassion, and yes, I'm moved by empathy and wanting to understand my fellow man better. But in the end, much more than charity, I'm motivated by justice. And I learned that as a kid from my dad, I think. And I think Irish people have a kind of short patience for bullies.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I do believe in all of the ups and downs of the relationships you're going to have with your home country and its people. I've always felt and believed that Irish people have a very kind of a sense of natural justice and a kind of they have a relationship with a sense of justice, which they have a very they have a shortcut to. You know what I mean? As they say, it's a short fuse.
Yeah, wherever I used to go in Africa, and I still go in Africa, I'll still get the odd nun or priest jumping out from behind a bush, an Irish priest.
Right.
And you know, for all my problems with the church, when I see they're tending to the poor, I kind of shut my mouth, and I'm amazed. I dedicated a song on the Atomic Bomb album to Sister Anne. Actually, it's called Crumbs from Your Table, and this woman, Sister Anne, and she had an office over a sewer, and she was fighting with such great passion for people in her community who couldn't get access to antiretroviral drugs and were therefore not even turning up to be diagnosed as having HIV. What's the point in being diagnosed, knowing your status, if you can't then be treated for it? And she inspired me to work with the One campaign, to work across political divides, to work with people that I wouldn't have in my 20s have worked with, to work with conservatives, to work with all kinds of people, and to try and if you care about something, that's the sort of heart of the One campaign and why we founded it, was the idea is that you don't have to agree on everything if the one thing you agree on is enough to put you together.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's interesting you say that. Nowadays, you know, a lot of people would think with kind of discourse where it is and oftentimes rhetoric where it is and finger pointing, etc., how it is, there often seems to be a divide between values, and that you know, it's quite a polarized time. How do you begin to cultivate a relationship with or engage a relationship with a world leader, or, you know, someone who's...
How do you end up with George Bush at your rehearsal? Yeah. When Edge is in the band? Not good. Yeah. Or Larry or Adam, for that matter.
But the difficult thing being, these are people who really hold the power as you know, with regards world debt, or, you know, debt in Africa.
Again, I'm being facetious. President Bush, as far as I understand, never turned up at a U2 show, let alone a U2 rehearsal.
Okay.
But I did work long and hard with him on stuff that shocked and surprised the band. And as far as they were, and I was as offended by the Iraqi war, and how could I sit there with my hand in my mouth and a big Irish lippy mouth and work with the President of the United States on what would turn into the largest health intervention in the history of fighting a disease, PEPFAR and the Global Fund, fighting, and he deserves credit for that, as did President Obama, who followed his lead and continued that. And it's continuing to this day. I felt that I had to put my vanity as a performer and as an artist, as a person. I think we have an ego, we have a scene, we have a crowd. There's people we want to impress. And I had to put that away. And I felt I owed it to Sister Anne. More importantly, I'm just picking Sister Anne, you know, I mean, to all the health workers, all the people who were witnessing this Holocaust. And I use the word carefully and precisely.
And I believe Nelson Mandela also used that term.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, I felt the people that I was witnessing, you know, in places in Africa, 1/3 of people were going to die. So imagine a football field, 1/3 of the people are going to die. Southeast Africa, 50% of all truck drivers, Didn't matter your social status, whatever. Teachers, workers, doctors. I mean, it was just destroying populations. And the look in people's eyes when you had to try and explain to people how you could just access these pills. They're available in Dublin or New York or Los Angeles or London, but they're not available where you are. Just, there's no excuse. There were no words that I could use that would not want me just to shrivel up and die. And I'm saying, you know, sorry about this, an accident of latitude and longitude. You know, simply where you were born decides whether you live or die. That's sort of a bit where we are here. And I couldn't live with myself with that. And so I worked with people I wouldn't normally work with. And I think if you care about climate change, if you care about the Sustainable Development Goals, if you really care about the outcome and not just winning an argument, you will have to, people listening to this podcast, you will have to work with people you don't want to work with, and maybe you don't even want to be in the room with. You have to work with them. You'll have to walk with them, march with them. The Sustainable Development Goals, just to go right there, it's 2.6 trillion annual cost. There is no chance that this can happen without a whole reimagining, reboot of capitalism, for a start, a reboot up the arse of capitalism. And that's not going to happen without a change in consumer behavior, conscious consumerism, call it what you like. But people can close down giant corporations now. With social media, it's kind of exciting, but it's dangerous, but it's exciting. But I think picking fights with the right people is going to be good. And then making alliances with the wrong people is going to be good.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, sadly. But it makes a hell of a lot of sense. And just for context for people listening, PEPFAR.
But that was Bush's piece of it, was PEPFAR, exactly.
Yes, yeah, PEPFAR. Just for context, just to see what that achieved. And as you say, getting into the room with somebody who you normally would not get in the room with. But I have it here somewhere.
22 million people are on antiretroviral therapies who would not have been. America has led the way on it. The UK did good, but America led the way. They're by far the largest part of that success. And Obama and Bush can take credit for this. But it was a mad panoply of characters. I mean, you had priests and punk rockers. You had evangelical Christians and, you know, avant-garde artists all working together. And that's the thing is, you know, politics and pop. Politics is pop. That's what it is. It's when the politics will change when the people want it to, because they need your vote. And we live in a largely capitalist system. They need you vote every time you spend. You're Very voting true. For a product. You're voting for a company. There's power in your pocket. Use it. And yeah, I mean, many people came together to work on that. But sometimes when I'm really feeling deflated or down, I think back to those queues in Malawi in particular, people queuing up to die, really. And now I go, wow, they all have access now. They have access. We've a way to go to. We've got to keep the pressure up. But it's an amazing scenario. 22 million people on these life-saving drugs. And people laughed. They thought it was stupid, thought it was dumb. How, you know, they couldn't even get drug adherence in San Francisco to the levels that they turned out they got with the rural poor in Africa. But there was a man who was the head of USAID. His name is Andrew Nassius, and I'm sorry to rake this over the coals, Andrew, if you're listening to this again, but the comment was, this is ridiculous. You want to get these expensive drugs to Africans. And his quote was, don't they realize, these people, meaning us, who care about this, who join One Campaign or Global Citizen or Oxfam or whatever, don't they realize that Africans don't have wristwatches? That was the quote. As if these people couldn't follow taking 3 pills a day down to 2 and down to 1 now if their lives depend on it. And that was a moment for me, and it's a moment now of great inspiration, because I think you look at the global goals, you look at some of these Everests we have to climb, and you think that's impossible. We can't do that. Well, we can, really, really can. And it's not that I can or you can. But the people listening can, if they work together, if they march together, if they make unusual relationships. I'm going to keep coming back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And how gaining a relationship, and you know, this is me just personally now, I'm very, very curious, because you're famously very good with people, famously a very charming individual, somebody who manages to bring out the best in people, clearly, as evident from what you have inspired people to come to the table on. Or what is your outlook on that, or how do you approach that?
I mean, charm is something to be a little suspicious of. I definitely try it on. I don't think I'll use everything I've got.
Right.
If I come from a line of traveling salespeople on my mother's side. I mean, I'm not messing.
Okay.
And I can sell things if I believe in them. And I sell songs, and that's called singing. And I sell ideas. That's called campaigning. And what does that really mean? I suppose it means storytelling. And I'm sitting, and you've been very kind to me here and very generous to me here, but I'm sitting with you, one of the great storytellers of the age. You're a great singer, great songwriter and all that, but you're a great storyteller. And your lyrics have taken music to the next level in storytelling. I'm telling you this, so just listen to me for a second. As if you haven't had to listen to me for the last hour. No. But storytelling is where it's at. Controlling the narrative. You know, we can't let big corporations control the narrative. Can't let governments control the narrative. Got to try as artists, if we're representing people who are living with the decisions taken by, if they're poor decisions. Some big corporations made some brilliant decisions. I'm very grateful for commerce. Don't want to come off. I'm very excited about where commerce could go. But the story we're telling is really important. The Sustainable Development Goals, but what's difficult about them is there's so many of them. And so people, it feels diffuse. But actually, it's not. It's like an annual report from the planet telling us how we're doing across a whole spectrum. Yeah. And, okay, is that what they are? All right. What one connects with me? What two connect with me? What three or what four? Find out. Find your way into the goals. If gender equality is a thing that you want to get out of bed and fight for every day as a man or a woman, gender equality. We need men fighting for that as well as just women. If the abuse of the environment is offending you, and I don't know anyone who it isn't at the moment. And what's striking about the global goals is actually they've put poverty on the in the southern hemisphere and poverty in the northern hemisphere in the same bracket as the intellectual poverty of not fighting climate change. So storytelling. We have to be honest with people about how difficult these Everests are. I think be really honest. Say, this is really, really going to hurt, this climb. This is going to cost us. But here's how we're going to do it, and then do it. And the only thing I can offer is just, again, I go back to the moment when people laughed in our face at the idea of getting expensive AIDS drugs to the rural poor in corners of Africa. It was possible because we worked with people that no one thought would ever work together. And that's what it's going to take with climate change. And that's climate change is a much bigger challenge. So we must be careful at this point in our planet's history of demonizing the other. I'm up for slagging people off. Like, I kind of grew up slagging people off and taking sides. But I think this is too big. I think you've got to find common ground to reach for higher ground.
No, absolutely. With some of the goals. Okay, so let's say your experience of how voicing that goal as to what medications you could be offered, say people in rural sub-Saharan Africa, that being viewed at the time with kind of derision as something that was ridiculous, something that was met with laughter, etc. But is that ever something that has ever discouraged you, or is it something that has driven you on more, or that standing up for
incredulity? That we look ridiculous.
Yeah,
I am a ridiculous figure. I'm actually fine with it, and I quite like my rock and roll starts to be a bit ridiculous. I mean, we were talking about John Lennon earlier, hiding under my bed when I was a kid. There he was doing his bag in, his peace ins. Everyone was interested in his marriage with Yoko. He said, okay, I'll use it. But people were so offended by this, war in Vietnam is a serious business, and this man's, making a dick out of himself. And in fact, he's showing his dick. Two virgins. They're these two beautiful souls standing together naked. I was like, wow. And we shouldn't forget humor, That's the other thing why John Winston Lennon is important to have under your bed. He's funny fucker. And we don't sort of trust people who are not, in a certain sense. Fascists, they love the language of violence. Hitler came to power. First thing he threw out were the surrealists, the Dadists. People who were laughing, mocking the Third Reich. A load of skinheads turning up to fight another load of skinheads isn't going to help. But the comedians have a real role to play here as well. In the storytelling, in the winning the narrative. It is ridiculous that there are people who deny climate change in the 21st century. And they say, well, no, we're not sure about the science. But 99% of scientists know there's climate change. There's some dispute about how fast it's coming about or cause, but everyone knows it's a real problem and carbon emissions are at the heart of it. And you think, well, no, we're not running with the science. But you're running with the science of, say, the internet, because you're now tweeting me. So you're fine with the internet part of the science. Yeah. And you seem to like nuclear, the splitting of the atom. You're fine with that. And blowing up Iran, okay. But you are not running with these scientific facts about what we're doing to the ecology of our planet. Yeah. And so I think you got to laugh at this. I mean, you've got to laugh, you've got to use humor, political satire, and then be very serious about getting organized.
If you find yourself inspired or angry, this podcast isn't just about talking. It's about making change happen, and you can do that right now. You can head to globalcitizen.org/crypower to take action on these issues. This is Hozier, and you're listening to my Cry Power podcast. I heard you mention, again, this is just curious, I heard you mention your time. You spent about a month and a half once in Ethiopia, I think some time after Live Aid possibly. But that was something that kind of shaped your outlook or shaped the next few years.
Ali and myself spent 6 weeks in Ethiopia on this exploration. It was Live Aid. All these musicians had gotten together, and really it was an extraordinary moment in time. It's the first globalized TV thing too. So you felt the size of the earth, and you felt how small it was. And I remember thinking, I need to understand this better. How millions of people can be that frail, and the nature of famine. And Patti Smith had this album called Radio Ethiopia. And it had woken up a part of me. And that Irishness that was in me as well, because we had a famine in our country in the middle of the 19th century. So I wanted to understand it better, and so we went out there and worked in a feeding station and an orphanage myself. And I didn't bring any cameras or any media or anything. It was just to learn. And on our way home from Ethiopia, having met these magnificent people, magnificent country, by the way, I remember saying to Ali, it's not just that people aren't sharing the provisions. It's not just that. This came out of a war. This came out of stuff we need to understand. And years later, a guy called Jamie Drummond came to see me, and he said, you raised whatever it was, 250 million with Live Aid. You know that, Africa spends that every month servicing old debts to rich countries. Going back to the Cold War era when the West was lending money to anybody who wasn't a communist. Mm-hmm. And now their grandchildren have to pay the debts. And that pointed me in a different direction. And I started to understand the structural aspects of poverty and that the injustice of systems, economic systems, that kept people down. Because I knew the Africans to be very industrious, entrepreneurial people. Clearly, Africa is one of the richest places on earth. I mean, it's this vast continent with vast wealth underneath the ground. And then these ingenious people standing over it, but it's not working. Why? Why is it not working? And yes, part conflict like in Ethiopia, but part a kind of opaque system, economic system, where people didn't know their rights and didn't know what they owned. Mm-hmm. Kleptocracies, people running off with their wealth, capital flight. I think we have an antidote to that these days, that actually information technology aids. The vaccine for poverty. There is a vaccine, and it's called transparency. Mm-hmm. So now you have civil society all over Africa, who are demanding to follow the money. Mm-hmm. They want transparency in their institutions, in their government. They want to know, how much did you pay for that mining contract? Mm-hmm. I can tell you, as an activist, the thing that I regret the most in 20 years of nearly full-time activist, but 40 years of being involved. And it was after a long campaign convincing the United States Congress to make it illegal to be a mining company registered on the New York Stock Exchange, to not publish what you paid for mining contracts in the development world. Sounds esoteric. Not at all, because if you can tell people how much you paid for these rights,
for the land rights,
then the people can ask their government, where did you spend that?
Where'd that money go? Yeah. And
the difference between what was described as being paid and what was actually being paid is where corruption lived. Right. And we and others marched alongside us, convinced the United States Congress, convinced the European Parliament, the French, the British, the Germans, all went there and are still there. But at the last minute, the SEC went with us on this, but at the last minute, we were injuncted. And the SEC was injuncted in the United States by the API, the American Petroleum Institute, who, for reasons they should have to explain, decided that this was too much regulation, and they forced a halt to this, the beginnings of clear and transparent process in the mining, in the extractive industries. And the reason I'm telling you the story is because what we should have done was we should have got out and we should have closed down petrol stations, gas stations as they're called in the US, and just closed down access to any oil company that was not on our side here. This was common decency. This was common sense. This is commonly accepted as the way to deal with what's known in Africa as the resource curse.
Okay.
There's an African proverb these days. There's a new one. It's called "Pray that we don't discover oil," because all the dark forces and all the dodgy geezers
It comes with it,
all come to your city, to your capital, to your country. So, and I failed to do that. I failed to get that across the line. Poor storytelling,
No.
whatever it is. But I think whilst telling stories about things we've achieved,
No.
or that I've been a part of achieving, I also have to share with you a story of how you can nearly achieve something and the not quite stays with you for the rest of your life.
Very, the amount of work, the amount of organization, global organization going towards something like that, and then to be kind of
Thwarted at the last minute.
At the last hurdle.
We didn't have we'd ran out of energy. I was going to say.
Yeah.
And that won't happen to us again.
But the Petroleum Institute, incredibly powerful.
But
group.
consumers can close them down. I mean, because remember, there are oil and gas companies that are in competition with one another. So you just need one to say yes.
Yeah, true.
And it's very hard for the other ones to sit it out.
Can you tell me more about the Poverty is Sexist campaign? What is it about? I suppose for global poverty, about gender equality, about trying to kind of ameliorate that gap.
Yeah, well, extreme poverty hits women and girls first and hardest. And if you're looking at those global goals, and I think it's global. It's goal 5 is gender. That is a really, really efficient use of your time. And I'll tell you why. Just keeping women, girls, in secondary school, girls from lower or middle income countries, just keeping them in secondary school would halve infant mortality. Just that. So it would add trillions of dollars to the world's economy, because girls who go to school delay getting married, delay having kids, generally are more entrepreneurial, contribute more to the economy. And it's deeply offensive, as my daughters reminded me, constantly. How can we solve the greatest problems facing the planet with only using half the brains on the planet? I mean, it's so obvious. You hardly need to state it, but actually it does need to be stated in certain countries. But actually, I'm going to take that back. It needs to be stated in every country, because again, my daughter Jordan's an activist, and she will tell me that gender equality doesn't exist anywhere.
It's a tricky one. I kind of have a lot of well-spirited arguments with friends and family about just that. But I think it's hard to we even here we have a long way to go. I mean, women were considered property, I suppose. A very, very short space of time ago on statutes.
Yeah, women can work the land in some countries in Africa, but they can't own it. Yeah, can't have a bank account. So this will be a really transformative effect on the world. I'm very excited about it. And it also means that loudmouth Irish rock stars can just walk at the back of the march. And though of course men are needed, and men, we will show up. It's sort of nice having, seeing these figures, inspiring figures, Beyonce Knowles, Malala, Michelle Obama, this is incredible women going around, Scarlett Curtis. I'm really excited about the sort of move over aspect of this this new feminism. And we all must be feminists. I asked Ali, did I qualify as a feminist? And I asked my kids. And they sort of said, well, you're going to have to try a bit harder.
Right.
I mean,
It's encouraging, though.
you just keep going.
Right.
You're on your way,
Right.
Dad.
Yeah.
And but they finally allowed me the accolade. But I know I've have to we have to all have to reboot the way we see the world and the way we see women in the world. Mm-hmm. You're managed by a very, very extraordinary woman.
I'm very fortunate, I have to say. Yeah, very fortunate. A lot of very good women around me, I think, and I think it all raised by a fantastic woman as well too, I have to say.
You were your mother?
Yeah, very. Yeah.
She's an artist, right?
She is an artist. Yeah. Again, yeah, I think a lot of the ethos definitely came. But she's an artist, and
did you go to, or did you have any Quaker influence on you?
I did. Yeah, I did. So I was raised.
It's the most extraordinary. I mean, again, it's okay to say we're suspicious of religions.
Yes, yeah,
but
absolutely.
Of all the faiths out there that would seem to be ahead of, and indeed prophetic in their description of the climate crisis, it would be the Friends of the Earth.
Yeah.
And I there's something I don't know much about the Quakers, but I have a huge admiration. And when I discovered that you had at least come through there, I thought, oh, that might this is because there's something about your music that feels like it's coming from a certain place, and I know that can't be. It's not so specific. Mm-hmm. And I suppose having a strong woman as this mother who's an artist. What was it like being a Quaker? If you don't mind me asking.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. To put it simply, what I kind of came away with was more, obviously, what I remember most about it was the lack of hierarchy. You know, the kind of the idea that there is no middleman between your relationship with the divine and with the infinite is yours. It's there. To commune with it.
Nobody to mediate it.
No one to mediate it. Yeah.
Doing a lot of priests and clergy out of a job there.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. It was very streamlined. It was very lot of cutbacks.
Anarchists welcome.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite lines of scripture is, the spirit. It's about the spirit, that where it comes from, nobody knows, and where it goes, no one can tell. I rather like that.
Yeah,
it sounds a little anarchic. But I quite like that. I think sometimes religion's what happen when the divine has left the building. Yeah,
there's that saying, building the temple to find that God has flown.
Right. Yeah.
But I definitely, it was always as simple to me, and it was always put as simply to me as you're finding the God in everything, and you're trying to find the divine
in nature,
in all things, and in people. The spark of the divine, as it was kind of
the first incarnation being the ecology,
right? Yeah, and so that was kind of instilled in me. But I think I don't know if that finds its way into the work, but it's really just. I wouldn't mind asking you about how you view music as a political vehicle, and I suppose I think actually Bruce Springsteen put it this way about music and songs being something that just reminds us of our best selves and who we are at the best of us when we're talking about, let's say, love songs. And I do believe that love is serious business. I don't think it is I don't think it's folly for yes, it's great stuff for pop songs, etc. But finding that spark of humanity and by extension, let's say, the divine or grace, if we want to use a term.
That's a great word. It's my favorite word.
Songs as being something that captures that and bears witness to that. And music as being something that carries that and is a vehicle for that. Is that something I kind of touched on a little bit earlier on, but is that something that kind of grew with your work, or was there an ethos from the beginning of?
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a late teens coming into punk rock and all that, But I was also, I was, and we were in the band. It wasn't just me, and our scene. It was a band called the Virgin Prunes. Edge's brother was in.
It's a great name.
Them, yeah. Avant-garde, right in your face, extraordinary, ahead of its time. But we were asking those big questions, daring to ask the big questions, and questions of faith, of religion. Ireland was being torn apart by sectarian violence. My father was Catholic. My mother was a Protestant. My father's family didn't turn up to the wedding. It was difficult to get married. My father and mother were beautifully brave in their romance. Mm-hmm. And I was blessed with never having religion stuffed down my throat. My dad was suspicious of nationalism. He used to quote, he used to say, "What is Ireland but the land that keeps my feet from getting wet?" That was his whole thing. Be very careful of those.
Doesn't do a good job of it either.
No, that's for sure. That's right. But he was like really suspicious of paramilitaries and all that stuff. He's like, "Whoa, watch that nationalism." And so it allowed us, I suppose, to ask bigger questions. And I remember there was a moment when our band nearly ended after our second album, October. We had a crisis of faith in our band and its usefulness. And we looked around us and we just thought this world is completely up its arse, and so are we. It's broken. How can a rock band play any role in the fixing of it? It's such, in one sense, a vainglorious thing to go about. And we decided to stop, and we couldn't figure it out. And Edge figured it out, and he started writing a song called "Sunday Bloody Sunday," and he said, we can write about the sectarianism in our country. And then I had this idea of contrasting the absurdity of, sort of Easter rising and all the kind of rah, 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 and then Jesus on the cross, and the stark contrast between people who take lives to support what they believe in, and people who give their life.
Yeah.
And so I suppose that's the dialectic at the heart of that song, Sunday Bloody Sunday.
And there is that line in there about the battle that Jesus won. Yeah.
And so, we were kind of, but it turns out, I thought we were just weirdos, but we were on Island Records, which you are.
Yes. Yeah.
And Island Records was set up by Chris Blackwell, who discovered Bob Marley. Yeah. And so when our manager, Paul McGuinness, went and said to Chris Blackwell, "Look, the lads have gone into one, and they're obsessed with their faith and trying to find meaning and all the rest of it." He was like, "Yeah, that's where Bob Marley started. That's where he stayed." He said, "That only looks strange if you're a white guy." He said, "There's no black musician isn't wrestling with this stuff. Mm-hmm. Anyone who came out of the church, they're wrestling with it. Marvin Gaye's wrestling with it. Curtis Mayfield's wrestling with it. Mm-hmm. It's only white suburban boys who aren't." Yeah. And so we thought, oh, right, maybe we're not such, we are weirdos, but we're not such weirdos. But we wanted everything out of music. And that's why I'm sitting with you. That's why I admire you, because I sense from your music that, you want so much out of your music. And it's like that old joke they say about in the UK about soccer. It's not a thing of life and death. It's something much more serious. That's where I'm at with music. And for me, it's art. It's also fun. I love pop music. I love dance music. But I want to be under somebody's bed.
Yeah.
I want to be under somebody's bed, whispering what in their ear pods, going, You know, the world is more malleable than you think. You don't have to take. It doesn't. You don't have to accept it as it is.
Mm-hmm.
You can kick it. You can kiss it. You can caress it. You know, I want to do that.
You can shape it. You can change it. Certainly, it's something you have managed to do.
Yeah. And you know, on Red, you mentioned Red. That again is the sort of crowd you're not supposed to hang out with. Right. You're an artist. What would you be doing hanging out with a bunch of corporations?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what made me interested.
Yeah.
How can we, if we're really serious about winning the argument in this climate crisis, going to need to change commerce.
Yeah.
With Red, we had a very simple proposition, sharpened the concept with Steve Jobs of all people, and you know, Apple are our biggest supporters at Red, but you know, we've everybody, Bank of America, we've Starbucks, we've Belvedere Vodka, we've got loads of things.
Yeah.
And we need the creativity of commerce to win this fight against HIV/AIDS. Let me tell you why we still need it. Because just at a point of inflection, when we're about to win this battle, greatest health crisis since the bubonic plague, since the Black Death, greatest health crisis in 600 years, we're just about to win it. We're at the point of inflection. And now these leaders are saying, America first, fuck the Africans, and cut those budgets. And there's people around the world following suit. And it's a really, really dangerous moment. If you spend half your life, which I have, fighting for an end to this tiny little virus that's wreaked so much havoc on so many people's lives, and you're just thinking this could just go up in smoke. We have to win the politics of the day. And commerce, we need their signage. You know, when Bank of America, they say it's a bank, you can't work with banks. I say they have 17,000 outlets that on World AIDS Day go red and tell people where we're at. I'll take that, thank you very much. We could never afford that. That's 100 miles of billboards.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, I'm trying to keep the theme of our conversation to do things you don't expect. Make relationships with people you wouldn't normally, if you care about whichever goal it is you care about.
What out of everything, because we've talked about, what would you most be proud of as an achievement?
Well, in music, you know, it's I just feel like being talented is like inherited wealth, you know, or being born beautiful, or it's no reason to be arrogant. It is a very humbling thing to wake up in the morning with a melody in your head, and you know the feeling, and find words to say something that needs to be said, either as a private dialogue or as a public one. So I'm proud of you two. I'm proud that four people who are so different have managed to stay together for this long, through thick and thin, and a lot of thick, and not enough thin, if I'm honest. But I'm really proud of that. And you're asking about my public life, because obviously it goes without saying I feel exactly the same about the family, and the six of us there. In activism, I think trying to make debt cancellation sexy is not something I can say we pulled off, but we made the argument cohere and cancel $90 billion of debt, and an extra 44 million children, according to the World Bank, went to school because of debt cancellation. So that's a big thing in my life. Universal access to antiretroviral therapies to fight AIDS in places where people were told that was impossible. That's the thing I'm most proud of as an activist, because of the various parties and the differences in personalities that it took to get that across the line. Gray's failing to get transparency legislation across to keep the extractive industries honest. Greatest slogan wasn't mine, but poverty is sexist. It just is. And I'm very proud of what the One campaigners do. We have 3 million members south of the equator in Africa, as many as there is in Europe. 3 million in Europe, and in the US with 3 million. We're nearly 10 million members. I think if we get in the One campaign, if we get it right, our organization will be Southern based and owned, meaning Africa, wherever, India, but not the normal, the end of the donor recipient relationship. It's just I'm not for verticals, I want a horizontal future for activism, flattening of that relationship, the dignifying of that relationship.
Amazing. Can I ask, what of the achievements of debt cancellation or access to retro
and your ARVs,
or your achievements with U2 and or being a family man also, which is the most challenging of all of that?
Oh, being in U2. Oh, that's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Hanging out with George Bush and arm wrestling with President Obama or headbutting whoever. That's easy compared to sitting in front of Edge, Adam, and Larry and trying to explain what was going on the show.
Right.
And I mean, it's wonderful. These are my blood brothers. Yeah. It's like family. Nobody can hurt you more than family.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And the other bands I'm in, Red, One, Rise, which is now an attempt to get commerce to go after the SDGs, the global goals. They're bands. They've had and will have difficulties, but the family, but no, being in a band it's tricky. The older you get as well, the sublimation of the male ego to other males. I mean, even for a really humble guy like me, it's hard.
Amazing. And what is in your sights? What is the next thing that you're very, very excited about? I know, as you say, the achievements of One being owned and ran in nearly entirely the Southern Hemisphere. But
we have this beautiful ecstatic album called Songs of Ascent. I don't know if we'll finish it soon or it'll take forever. It's about forever. That's its subject. And Songs of Ascent they're 15 psalms, and they're named after the 15 steps from the women's chamber actually up to the temple in Jerusalem. So it's an old idea. And I'm obsessed with David, King David in the Bible, who turns out was a right bollocks. But he was kind of a interesting figure who was brutally honest with God at all times, and even about himself being a bollocks. And I'd love to do that. I'd also love to do a just straightforward fuck off rock and roll album with this band, because on this last tour they got to a place they've been there before. I think they've always had greatness in them, but we do a lot of very good in between the great. I felt like I just caught up with them on this last tour, and there was moments we had a circular stage, and it was called the E stage, on the Innocence and Experience tour, the Experience and Innocence tour, and they just hit some powerful stuff. And I'd love to find songs that could contain that fire.
Thrilled. I have to say, hearing you speak about it with such energy and such hunger as well too is is inspiring and is a welcome kick up the ass to me. So I have to say, thank you.
You don't need one, but one day.
Yeah. But I couldn't thank you enough. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor sitting down, and thank you for your time and for your openness and for your honesty and for sharing your worries and your concerns and your hopes and your joys as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Really glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I could cry.
Cry Power is made in association with Global Citizen, a movement of activists all over the world who are using their collective voice to end extreme poverty by 2030. You can head to globalcitizen.org/crypower to take action on any of the issues we talk about on the show and earn tickets to gigs all over the world by signing petitions, writing emails, or sending tweets to world leaders. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the Cry Power podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts right now. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Hozier, and this is Cry Power.